You are welcome to study section 7, the upper limbs. The upper limbs consist of 4 segments, which are further subdivided into regions, namely the shoulder, the arm, the forearm, and the hand. It is characterized by its mobility and ability to grasp, strike, and conduct fine motor skills, that is, manipulation. These characteristics are especially marked in the hand. Efficiency of hand function results in a large part from the ability to place it in the proper position by movement at the scapulothoracic, glenohumerus, elbow, radioulnar, and wrist joints. In this study section, therefore, you shall be introduced to the division of the upper limbs, the axilla and its structure, the cubital fossa, the muscles of the forearm, and the compartment and space of the hand. When you will have studied this section, you should be able to list the division of the upper arm. You should be able to discuss the axilla and its structures. You should be able to describe the cubital fossa. You should be able to highlight the muscles of the forearm, and lastly, you should be able to enumerate the compartment and space of the hand. Let's start with the axilla. The axilla is the pyramidal space inferior to the glenohumeral joint and superior to the skin and axillary fascia at the junction of the upper arm and the thorax. The shape and size of the axilla vary depending on the position of the arm. It almost disappears when the arm is fully abducted. The axilla provides a passageway for vessels and nerves going to and from the upper limb. The axilla is composed of an apex, the base, and 4 walls, 3 of which are muscular. The apex of the axilla is the cervicoaxillary canal, the passageway between the neck and the axilla. It is bounded by the first rib, clavicle, and superior edge of the scapula. The arteries, veins, lymphatics, and nerves transverse this superior opening to pass to and from the arm. The base of the axilla is formed by the concave skin, subcutaneous tissue, and axillary fascia extending from the arm to the thoracic wall, forming the axillary fossa, that is, the armpit. The anterior wall of the axilla is formed by the pectoralis major and minor and the pectoral and clavipectoral fascia associated with them. The anterior axillary fold is the inferior-most part of the anterior wall. The posterior wall of the axilla is formed chiefly by the scapula and subscapularis on its anterior surface, and inferior by the teres major and latissimus dorsi. The posterior axillary fold is the inferior-most part of the posterior wall that may be grasped. The medial wall of the axilla is formed by thoracic wall and the overlying serratus anterior. The lateral wall of the axilla is the narrow bony wall formed by the intertubular sulcus of the humerus. The axilla contains the axillary artery and its branches, axillary veins, and its tributaries, nerves, and of the cord and branches of the brachial plexus, lymphatic vessels, and several groups of axillary lymph nodes, all embedded in axillary fat. Proximally, the neurovascular structures are ensheathed in a sleeve-like extension of the cervical prevertebral fascia and the axillary sheath, axillary artery and vein. The axillary artery begins at the lateral border of the first rib as the continuation of the subclavian artery and ends at the inferior border of the teres major. It passes posterior to the pectoralis minor into the arm and becomes the brachial arteries when it passes distal to the inferior border of the teres major. For descriptive purposes, the axillary artery is divided into three relative to the pectoralis minor. Parts numbers also indicates the number of its branches. The first part of the axillary artery is located between the lateral border of the first rib and the medial border of the pectoralis minor. It is enclosed in the axillary sheath and has one branch, the superior thoracic artery. The second part of the axillary artery lies posterior to the pectoralis minor and has two branches, the thoracoacromial artery and lateral thoracic artery, which pass medial and lateral to the muscle respectively. The third part of the axillary artery extends from the lateral border of the pectoralis minor to the inferior border of the teres major and has three branches. The subscapular artery is the largest branch of the axillary artery. Opposite the origin of this artery, the anterior circumflex humeral artery and posterior circumflex humeral artery arise. The axillary vein lies initially, that is distally, on the anteromedial side of the axillary artery, with its terminal parts anterior-inferior to the artery. This large vein is formed by the union of the accompanying brachial veins and the bacilli cave at the inferior border of the teres major. The axillary vein ends at the lateral border of the first rib, where it becomes the subclavian vein. The veins of the axilla are more abundant than the arteries and are highly variable and frequently anastomose. The axillary lymph nodes. The pectoral nodes consist of 3 to 5 nodes that lie along the medial wall of the axilla around the lateral thoracic vein and inferior border of the pectoralis minor. The pectoral nodes receive lymph mainly from the anterior thoracic wall, including most of the breast. The subscapular, this posterior nodes, consist of 6 or 7 nodes that lie along the posterior axillary fold and subscapular blood vessels. These nodes receive lymph from the posterior aspect of the thoracic wall and scapular region. The humeral, that is the lateral nodes, consist of 4 to 6 nodes that lie along the lateral wall of the axilla, medial and posterior to the axillary vein. These humeral nodes receive nearly all the lymph from the upper limb, except those ones that are carried by lymphatic vessels, accompanied by the cephalic vein, which primarily drain to the apical axillary and infraclavicular nodes. Efferent lymphatic vessels from the pectoral, subscapular, and humeral nodes pass to the central nodes. The central nodes consist of 3 or 4 large nodes situated deep to the pectoralis minor near the base of the axilla in association with the second part of the axillary artery. Efferent vessels from the central nodes pass to the apical nodes. The apical nodes are located at the apex of the axilla along the medial side of the axillary vein and the first part of the axillary artery. The apical node receives lymph from all other groups of cervico-axillary canal, the brachial plexus. The brachial plexus is a major network of nerves supplying the upper limb. It begins in the lateral cervical region and extends into the axilla. The brachial plexus is formed by the union of the anterior ramming of the C5 to T1 nerves, which constitutes the roots of brachial plexus. In the inferior part of the neck, the roots of the brachial plexus unite to form three trunks. A superior trunk from the union of the C5 and C6 roots, a middle trunk which is a continuation of the C7 roots, and inferior trunk from the union of the C8 and T1 roots. Each trunk of the brachial plexus divides into anterior and posterior divisions as the plexus passes through the cervico-axillary canal posterior to the clavicle. Anterior division of the trunk supply the anterior compartment of the upper limb, and posterior division of the trunk supply the posterior compartment of the upper limb. The division of the trunks form three cords of the brachial plexus within the axilla. They have the anterior division of the superior and middle trunk unite to form the lateral cord. The anterior division of the inferior trunk continues as the medial cord, while the posterior division of all three trunks unite to form the posterior cord. The cord of the brachial plexus are named for their position in relation to the second part of axillary artery. The lateral cord is lateral to the axillary artery, most easily seen when the limb is abducted. The brachial plexus is divided into supraclavicular and infraclavicular parts by the clavicle. Four branches of the supraclavicular part of the plexus arise from the roots, that is anterior ramming, and trunk of the plexus, that is dorsal scapular nerve, long thoracic nerve, nerve to the subclavius, and suprascapular nerve, and are approachable through the neck. Muscular branches arise from the anterior ramming of C5 to T1 to supply the scalene and longus colli muscles. Branches of the infraclavicular part of the plexus arise from the cords of the brachial plexus and approachable through the axilla. This is the diagram of the spinal root of the brachial plexus. Arm. The arm extends from the shoulder to the elbow. Two types of movements occur between the arm and the forearm at the elbow joint: flexion, extension, and pronation, supination. The muscles forming these movements are clearly divided into anterior and posterior, that is flexor and extensor groups. The chief action of both groups is at the elbow joint, but some muscles also act at the glenohumeral joint. You can go through your course manual and read more about the arm. The muscle of the forearm, try and read more about that too. Then the arteries and veins of the arm, they are also important. Try to go through it, the brachial artery and the likes. Thank you for listening. See you in the next class.